Good evening, members and officers. It's just coming up to 7, so if I call you to order, and then if Democratic Services could fire up. We're on, right, we're underway. So good evening and welcome to this meeting of Waverley's Housing Overview and Scrutiny Committee. For those joining the meeting by Zoom or YouTube, my name is Councillor Richard Seaborn and I'm chair of the committee. I'm supported this evening by a number of officers. We've got Head of Housing Operations, Hugh Wagstaff, Head of Housing Delivery and Communities, Andrew Smith, Service Improvement Manager, Annalisa Howson, Housing Manager, Laura Dillon. There you go. Hi, Laura, sorry. On Zoom, I'm told we have, yes, we have Louisa Blundell, Housing Development Manager. We've got our Strategic Asset Manager, Peter David. Good evening. Then we have our Scrutiny Officer, Mark Mills. Democratic Services and Business Support Team Manager, Louise Fleming, who's managing the technology for us, and our Democratic Services Officer, Georgina Hall. So, I think we'll know who we are. Let's get on with the meeting. First item is to approve the minutes of the meeting that was held on the 8th of June. These have been available on the Waverley website for some time. Do any members wish to raise any points of accuracy? No hands, in which case, can we agree that the minutes are an accurate record of the meeting? Thank you very much. Right. Georgina, would you like to take us through apologies and details of any substitutions this evening, please?
Apologies have been received from Councillor Peter Marriott.
Okay, and no substitutes? No, okay.
No substitutes, I'm afraid, and no other apologies.
Okay. Have there been any declarations of interest received prior to the meeting?
None received, Chairman. Okay.
Do any members wish to declare any interests in this evening's business? No? Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions from members of the public?
None received.
Questions from members?
None received.
Right, good. We can get down to the real business of the evening then. First substantive item is agenda item 6. That's to consider the relevant sections of the performance report for April to June, namely the housing delivery section starting on page 48 and then housing operations starting on page 55. So I'll start by asking if Andrew Smith wants to introduce the housing delivery section, and then we'll take any questions on that. Andrew?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so starting in the paragraph entitled Housing Delivery, across the housing delivery programme, there has been progress, some progress fairly brisk, as site B at Oxford Ridge begins to reach the skies. Other schemes like the work we're doing in Chiddingfold and Churt, a bit more slowly during the quarter, all sorts of reasons for that, planning, a lengthy sort of tendering process for contractors, but progress nevertheless. Modular homes that we had funding for from MHCLG at Badgers Close in Farncombe are due to be handed over. I know it's this quarter's report that I'm giving you really, but I think an update for members would be useful. Had terrible problems with utilities, getting the utilities to be connected, but by the end of the month they should be handed over, and there will then be an event, an opportunity for members to have a look at those. And I think as well, it's been suggested that it's about time members of the committee had a look at what's going on in Oxford Ridge, if you don't already know. So we're going to arrange that. Louisa and I are going to arrange that in due course. Big thing for strategy enabling is the new housing strategy. We're working on that. We have had the results through the draft report of the affordability study. I came back from holiday at the beginning of this week and haven't had a chance to look through that. But that's a vital evidence base that will support the objectives of the new housing strategy. Clearly, we want to deliver homes that our residents can afford across the different kinds of tenure. And as I say, that will inform the strategy, and the draft strategy will come to this committee in due course. Work is going on with that at the moment. Other than that, I'll come to homelessness probably when I share something of what the team does generally, and also in relation to mental health. But again, the numbers in temporary accommodation are very, very low. The team are very active in preventing homelessness rather than relieving it, which is what we always want to do. Prevention is better than cure. And through the quarters, there's very little to say other than we have so few in temporary accommodation. The numbers that we have to triage and help remain gradually going upwards. The team are doing a fantastic job. And so really, I think if members have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them for you now. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Right. Members, questions? Yes, Councillor Keane, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask Andrew, given that the furloughs are ending very soon, are you anticipating sort of an upsurge in people losing their homes or not being able to pay mortgages and things like that and coming to us?
That's a very good question, Councillor. We've been expecting those kinds of things to come over the hill for quite some while, when landlords were then able to evict people should they want to. We expected this to happen at various points during the pandemic. It is possible. Certainly our work with the Citizen Vice Bureau, they are certainly gearing up for that and have had more people who have never had to approach them for help before, people who simply can't pay their mortgage because they have lost work. So we live in expectation of something that will happen. Nothing really has yet. There hasn't been a spike due to that yet, but it could do, yes.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other questions, I've got one, which I think there will be an answer to, because I asked it a couple of weeks ago in pre-warning that I'd ask it this evening, and so this will probably be addressed to Louisa Blundell. She's probably, unless you've been primed, Andrew, to answer. I'll leave it to sort it between yourselves. But on page 48, there was mention of drainage problems at the Oxford Ridge site. So question, two parts to it. Is it under control? But more importantly, we've got lots of phases there. Is it likely to be a risk at the subsequent phases? Because if it is, then that's probably something we ought to just draw the executive's attention to, although I'm sure they've probably thought about it. Right, who's going to answer?
Thank you, Chairman. As Louisa is gazing over us all this evening from the screen, I think it's only right that she should have the privilege of answering the question. She will give you more detail than I would, although I could answer it. Is that all right, Chairman, if Louisa takes it?
Good evening, members. Yes, I'm quite happy to take that question. We've been liaising with the bill contractor for Site B, which is Stacom, and our EA is working with the construction director to prepare a phased programme of remediation works in the 30 out of the 37 homes that were delivered. 19 have flagged potential drainage issues, so they're starting on the preparation of a programme of work to remediate and improve the drainage in those properties. So at the moment we're waiting for a programme of work to come out, and it was due out on Monday, but we're still waiting for it, but it is in hand. And in answer to the second part of your question, is it in terms of lessons learned and how we're going to mitigate it happening again? We are working again with Stacom on Site B, and so they're very much aware of what has happened on A. And in terms of our strategy with other bill contractors, this will be something that will be particularly flagged with our clerk of works in other schemes, and also in our employers' requirements in terms of scope for making the necessary checks and measures on site, and ensuring that the contractor's brief is very clear in terms of our expectations.
Okay, that's excellent, very thorough, thank you. So I don't think that leads to any need to point things in the direction of the executive. Seems like it's under control. Excellent. Right, so that's housing delivery. We move now on to the second part of the quarterly report, which starts on page 55. Can I ask Annalisa Howson, our Service Improvement Manager, to take us through that part?
Thank you. So just a reminder, this is Q1, so this was April, May and June of this year. And you've all had the opportunity to read the report, so I'll give you the highlights of the highlights. So we've been making real progress with our interim responsive repairs and void contractor. You'll see that they met with the tenants panel, portfolio holder for housing and Hugh, head of operations, to explain what they've been doing to improve the service and what steps they've been taking. And we're starting to see results of that, as you can see with the performance information. You're also aware that we've had ongoing works to tackle a case of Legionella in one of our senior living schemes. I'm delighted to say that those works have been completed, and during Q1 the contractor was making good and redecorating before that final handover. Unfortunately, we did have an issue following a fire safety inspection at another of our senior living schemes, and we're taking steps to mitigate the risk and make those improvements to ensure everybody's safety in the building. As you'll recall, we normally do a star team for the quarter, and for this quarter we'd like to recognise the housing management team for the exceptional work they've done in resolving and supporting people who've been experiencing antisocial behaviour. During lockdown and with coming out of lockdown, we've seen an increase in cases and neighbour nuisance, and they've worked really closely with the police and other agencies, and also with the community safety team, as we had 2 community triggers in that quarter. As part of that work, we've worked really closely with Mediation Surrey. We've got a new service level agreement with them, and I'd really express my support for that service, and they would be willing to give an introduction to members if they were interested in finding out more about Mediation Surrey. And finally, we've been getting a bit green-fingered, and the community development team have been working with the charity COPs, and we've been creating some community orchards in some of our unloved spaces, which is a real delight to see. And the final paragraph is about the STAR survey that's already on the report agenda for today. Sorry. I'm happy to take any questions.
Excellent. Members. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I was listening with interest to what Annalisa had to say about the works to, well, I hope, eradicate the Legionella. And I know the works have been done and we're waiting to hand over to the occupiers effectively. But I just wondered, do we test to make sure that the Legionella has been eradicated? Can we be sure?
Yes, so we have tested and it has been eradicated from this scheme. And it's just to reassure members, this came to light because we do regular testing. So each of our senior living schemes has a risk assessment in relation to water safety, and that risk assessment dictates how often we test the waters and what type of testing. So yes, I can give reassurance that there is testing in place, and this particular scheme has been tested and it has been eradicated from there. Thank you.
Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Chairman. One of my hobby horses is the relet voids, and can I congratulate all concerned for bringing things down. If you look at the graph, if you imagine a graph, I would have thought the next quarter will be green. If we are going at the pace we are, keep everything crossed. But it's good to see such good progress has been made from bad figures, which was no thought for the officers due to COVID, but we now seem to be getting on top of it. And it does mean a lot to the council, because it makes a difference to our bottom line on income. Because any council house that's empty, we don't get any rent, and therefore the more of our voids can be relet quickly, the better. So I wish to record our congratulations to the officers I know we're still in the red, but we're only marginally in the red now. Thank you.
Good, good. Okay, if there's no other questions, can I just follow up on the issue with the Surrey Fire and Rescue? It's clearly under control at the senior living property where the problem was identified. Can I just ask if there's anything, could there be a similar issue at their other senior living properties?
The chair, very similar to the water, our senior living schemes have fire risk assessments and they've been having them for a number of years. And as the report indicates, it's through our fire risk assessment that we actually notified the fire service that there's some issues at this scheme. We've had regular surveys of this scheme previously, and I think people's heightened awareness of building safety has changed, especially since Grenfell. So we will continue doing those inspections, but those inspections there may be similar issues may rise going to the other schemes. So I really can't guarantee that what the new inspections will find and what they will recommend. All I can give a reassurance to members is that we do have a regime of carrying out fire risk assessments of our stock. And I suppose the change in expectations, the change in knowledge of buildings may produce recommendations that require extensive work again.
Okay, thank you. Right, so there's one recommendation from this item, and that's that we consider the performance of the service areas under our remit and make recommendations to senior management or the executive as appropriate. So there was mention of the opportunity possibly for councillors to get some more briefing on mediation. I'd certainly be interested in that. Would other members support that? So can we suggest to senior management that I think basically all members would benefit from that? Could you arrange some kind of briefing for us on the Surrey mediation scheme? I've certainly seen it offered and it looks to be potentially very powerful. Councillor Keane?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I have actually attended those in the past and they are really eye-opening and very, very good to know what goes on. So I hugely recommend people go. I certainly would be happy to attend again.
That's excellent. Good, good. So,
yes, because I think it would be useful because it just doesn't mean housing officers can make referrals, councillors can make direct referrals, or even members of the public can make their own referrals for themselves. So yeah, that's why we want to spread the knowledge, people being aware of the service, so it is used. Thank you.
excellent. Right, so we'll pass the buck back to you to organise something for us.
Yes, if I may just come in here with a comment, a piece of news. Our housing portfolio holder was engaged in helping a tenant who'd been subjected to assault at the weekend. And so it's very much uppermost in my mind that mediation is an extremely good thing. But I just thought that people might like to know that our portfolio holder doesn't just look at policy and stuff, she gets out there.
Right, well, our portfolio holder is with us this evening, so Councillor Rosamond, well done. Praise indeed from the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Right, and Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. My ward is a very pleasant ward, very peaceful, but I have to say that on 6 occasions over the last couple of years, I have had to use the services of the mediation service, and they have been particularly helpful and have sorted out some quite nasty problems for me. Thank you.
Good, okay, so if you can jot that down, that officers will organise something for all members. And then the other point to note down to, I think, to executive is the point that Councillor Goodrich made. Congratulations to the housing operations team for reversing the situation with responsive repairs and voids and getting them very nearly under control. So I think that concludes that item. If we move on to the next item, which is something we've been trying to, excuse the cliche of the phrase, get our heads around pretty much since we started as a team 2 years ago, trying to decide exactly what we wanted on the issue of mental health. Everyone was, I think, agreed that we wanted to discuss mental health, but how to actually come up with something related to housing and focused. So this evening, Andrew Smith and Laura Dillon are going to give us a presentation. Can I encourage everyone, please, to listen carefully to what they say and then direct your questions to what they say, because mental health is an enormous issue. A lot of that falls within the remit of community wellbeing. We're focusing on the housing side of it today, so they'll talk to that. And then I think our aim is probably, is there somewhere where we want to take this when we've heard the offer that the housing teams can put out there? So.
Good evening, members. So some of you may not know me. I'm Laura Dillon, the housing manager here at Waverley. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the team. So we've expanded over the last couple of years. We've got 8 housing officers at the moment, which cover all of our housing stock across the borough. Mental health is something that is our daily bread and butter, and we deal with quite often, but there is can be lack of support, but we link in very well with the mental health team. We're very lucky to have adult social care in the building, and we've made some strong relationships there as well. The team do recognise, and there are obviously challenges as well that they come up against when dealing with our tenants out in the borough. There may be people which we deal with which have diagnosed mental health issues, which we can link in with GP surgeries, the mental health team, adult social care, and also other agencies if there is obviously addictions and stuff which is linked to their mental health. So Catalyst is one of the other agencies that we can link into. But one of the biggest challenges that we probably have, which links in with the antisocial behaviour and neighbour disputes that we have, is people which have undiagnosed mental health addiction issues, or maybe non-engagement because of undiagnosed mental health. So they are challenges for the team. They spend a lot of their time trying to build relationships with our tenants. As you know, we really want to understand sort of what they're facing and how we can best help them. Sometimes it is maybe regular conversations, regular visits with them to start building those trust relations before we can kind of maybe refer them into other services. You are right in our mediation services are something, and also they have a coaching service. So people which may be being hugely impacted and it is impacting their mental health, and Mediation Surrey do provide a service for people which are experiencing it starting to consume their lives. So I would absolutely recommend having a look at their website and promoting their services within your ward. The resilience of our team, as I said, we can sometimes be dealing with people calling up threatening suicide. It is unfortunately quite a regular thing that my team do have to deal with. And you know, there will be regular referrals which are made to the MASH, the multi-age partnership hub, if we feel that there is a safeguarding, and in some cases we are having to ring 999 if there is a welfare concern and a fear for their own lives. So there is those calls that my team do undertake, and it's not just one call, it's 2 calls or 3 calls that they could potentially be undertaking in the same week. So, you know, to support my team and, you know, the resilience themselves, because if I don't have a team which is keeping that work-life balance, then we're not supporting our tenants. So we do offer my team and the wider housing team access to a clinical psychologist, which a few of my team do take up on a monthly basis, to have that hour's time to talk about what they're feeling, and if it is impacting, you know, my door is always open to my team, and I'm quite lucky that they know that I will sit and I will listen and allow them the time to open up, because it's not just what they're dealing with at work. We all have our own personal lives as well, and there's, you know, some of these things that we do deal with on a regular basis can trigger other things as well. So we're very much at supporting of those. I thought I would talk a sort of a bit of a case study of one of the cases that we have recently dealt with, which just kind of shows the hard work and dedication which goes into managing the cases that we deal with. We had a tenant who had happily lived in her property for 20 years, but sadly 2 years ago that her daughter committed suicide actually while she was in a psychiatric unit, which impacted hugely on the tenant's welfare, and with multiple attempts of her own suicide. Her daughter actually would walk around with a ligature around her neck, and the same as now that the tenant would do herself. One of my officers worked tirelessly to work with this tenant and work with the police, because the antisocial behaviour which was coming to the door through drugs and alcohol and potential prostitution was a huge impact to the community, which it gives its own challenges, because we can't divulge to the wider community the issues that we're having. And it does always look like, because I know that, you know, we have plenty of inquiries from you saying that the tenants are saying we're doing nothing, but we just can't divulge the information to the community when there is such hard work which is being done multi-agency through CHARM, JAG, and various other multi-agency meetings that we would meet with mental health teams and social services. My housing officer continued to work with the tenant along with the police, and we work really closely with the police because we tend to make sure that we're singing off the same hymn sheet and not a different one. So working together, making her understand, because they still have capacity to understand the rights and wrongs of their tenancy agreement. But alongside that is clearly making sure that the correct referrals. Now, because of the tragedy of her daughter, she didn't want to engage with mental health services, but there is a different area that we could direct her to and get her to engage to, which she did. It was a long process. But through the CHARM meetings that Andrew chairs, we managed to arrange agreement that we would rehouse her, because she was being impacted also by under occupancy charges and not working. She was having to pay for the second bedroom. So we managed to arrange for her to be on the housing register and bid successfully for a one-bedroom property, which she has now moved. Which has obviously the impact on the community is now no longer there, and the tenant is successfully thriving in her new home. So that's just a very small snapshot of kind of the day-to-day things that my team do deal with. Happy to take any questions.
Yes, Councillor Goodrich.
Some of the problems that we as councillors have is when we get a lot of emails from a tenant complaining of numerous things. And I just wonder, you know, when I then contact officers and say, look, this particular person is causing me grief, how much can officers tell the councillor concerned that there are mental health issues, therefore tread carefully, as distinct from, because I think, you know, we as councillors can be more sympathetic to the officers as well if one knows that this particular person is on your radar.
I'm all for obviously councillors contacting officers or contacting myself directly. The conversation, as soon as it's quicker it starts, hopefully the easier it is to manage situations or resolve situations. It is very difficult. I mean, we can probably give an indication, but we wouldn't be able to go into the depths of, you know, of the complexities if we're aware, because sometimes we're not aware of actually formal diagnosis. But, you know, we could give an indication, but we wouldn't be able to go into full personal details of that person. But, you know, we could probably give a more of a detailed update of how we're managing the case, or what we're looking to do to resolve that matter.
Okay, Councillor Keane.
Could maybe a way forward on that be that, I mean, when you were talking, and I am quite in awe of your staff and yourself, because it is a very difficult thing to manage mental health issues, but maybe, you know, you can't give councillors information about a tenant, but it may be that you could give a signal to say, we would advise you to tread carefully. And if that was sort of the one thing that you're saying to a councillor, meaning there are mental health issues here, perhaps that's something we could understand. It's like just a password or a passcode to a councillor.
Yeah, that could be something that, yeah, seems a sensible way forward.
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. A brief question. Could I just confirm, is the service you're offering limited to Waverley Borough Council housing tenants? I mean, we have a huge number of people living in Waverley who are not necessarily tenants. Do you, as part of your service, perhaps, are you able to direct other people to the appropriate services? I'm thinking back briefly to what I said about the mediation service, and I'd like to confirm that that is not limited to Waverley tenants.
No, mediation services is open to all the public.
Yes.
It's not just a landlord service. So anybody, whether you're a private owner, private rented, or social tenant, you can make those referrals to that service.
Sorry, if you could just confirm about the mental health services.
The mental health, so my team only deal with our social tenants. You could look towards social prescribing for support, or that the first port of contact for most people should be their GP. And if the GP can't manage, then obviously they make the referrals onto mental health services.
Right. Thank you very much. Andrew, were you going to say anything in addition to that?
Yes, I thought I would just go through, I mean, a lot of what I say will overlap with what Laura has told you in the way that we handle our clients who do have mental health issues. But anyone who approaches us as homeless or threatened with homelessness is triaged. And part of that is to look very carefully at their medical history, what they're experiencing at the moment, what practitioners they're engaging with or not engaging, whether it's a prevention that we're doing, i.e. helping them not lose their home or find a new one before they get evicted, or the relief duty where they are actually presenting to us as homeless from that point. Mental health can be a leading driver for homelessness, linked often with relationship breakdown, linked often with substance, drug, alcohol abuse. As someone comes to us and presents to one of my officers, then, as I say, detailed questions are asked, a full housing assessment is done, and if they are not relating to the right services, then at that point we try and signpost and handhold and help them to engage with the services that they need to. Health, mediation, mental health, and we keep in contact with those practitioners. So one thing it needs to be remembered is we are there to house people, but just housing people, there are a lot of other things around that which we can't directly deal with, but that's why we have to pull in other people to help with a particular client. Now, often when people present as homeless, they are in quite a desperate state. They can be a risk to themselves. they too will ring up and say they're going to commit suicide if we don't house them, etc., etc. And the team have a number of calls that over a period of time. If they're concerned, they ring 999. That's what you do. And then the police will do a welfare check. And again, we then begin to try to help that person on a pathway to securing a sustainable and suitable home. If we are concerned, it's not quite to the point of ringing 999, we'll make a safeguarding referral to Surrey County Council through the multi-agency safeguarding hub, always trying to signpost our clients to those who will meet the needs that they are presenting with. We have two major tools at our disposal to help clients on their pathway. First of all is our specialist support team, the Housing Options Specialist Support Team that's headed up by Chloe Whiteman. She works under Mike Rivers. They give short-term assistance and support to people that we have placed in private rented accommodation who don't have the benefit of Laura's team at that point because they're in private rented accommodation. They will not often have a clue how to manage a tenancy. That may not be particularly to do with mental health. It often is. They may be victims of domestic abuse. A number of them come to the community harm and risk management meeting that Laura mentioned, and their particular case will be brought by one of the specialist support officers if they are struggling in the accommodation or if there's antisocial behaviour caused by them or directed to them. Mental health plays a big part in a lot of that, and a lot of the community trigger work that we're doing with the community safety team, the neighbour disputes, there is a lot of mental health going on there. Fortunately, to that multi-agency meeting, we do have mental health practitioners now. We didn't hardly ever when they were physical meetings because they wouldn't be able to come to Waverley from wherever they were. Now they can log in on Zoom. We're getting much more input from mental health specialists into helping to support homeless people that we placed in private rented accommodation. The second and more longer term, I think, tool at our disposal is our specialist partners. Those of you may remember, if you were on the committee 2 years ago, we had a presentation from Transform Housing and Support, which is a housing provider that specialises in those who present with a range of complex needs, mental health clearly being central to a lot of those needs. And we work closely with them. We are able to place individuals in specialist accommodation where the support workers for Transform will enable those people to either maintain some kind of a tenancy or give them the support they need so that they don't then find themselves homeless again, so they begin to rebuild their lives. There's a quarterly housing panel that meets between providers and local authorities to maximise vacancies, make sure there's movement between the various kinds of accommodation. So, for example, a single homelessness person that's presenting with mental health, drug abuse, etc., may well be placed by us in the York Road project in Woking. We've worked with them now for a number of years. Specialist providers, they also work with us on our rough sleeper outreach. And then from that hostel accommodation, they'll move on to what's called move-on accommodation, and then low-level supported flats or support that is given just enough for them to begin to learn how to manage a home and their affairs and their money and so forth. Then on to perhaps more independent living before finally being able to be allocated social housing. We've a number of stories that I could say if we had time where we've seen a client go through that pathway and then be allocated one of our properties and is doing well. We've also equally seen a number who have not and returned to chaos. And as I was talking to one of my officers the other day, you'll always have the walking bewildered. And the walking bewildered just cannot manage and will always need some kind of specialist accommodation. Often that is due to ongoing unresolved mental health issues. One thing we do with our providers and our partners is to be flexible about the length of time a particular client will stay in any given accommodation. York Road project don't think the 21 days, which tends to be the period of time you spend in a hostel, is not enough. And so they will be very flexible about how long one of our clients will spend with them until they feel, and we feel, that person is able to move on. So although this is general about homelessness and those presenting with complex needs, mental health is so often at the heart of all this, as well as all the other needs that are presented by our clients. The issue we have, I think, and I do apologise, councillors, I had an operation on my ear today to remove a lesion and it keeps weeping and bleeding. So I'm just going to dab my ear for a moment. Sorry about that. It's very off-putting when it does that. We find it very difficult actually to be able to refer anyone to the community mental health recovery service. It's a complex process. It's difficult for anyone to be assessed and accepted. They need a referral from their GP, and there are quite a considerable list of criteria for somebody to be referred. Some of our clients are chaotic and self-destructive, and even in that particular situation, it can be hard to get a referral. And that is an obstacle we do face. On the positive side, some of members will be aware that we were very successful in a bid to government for funding through the Rough Sleeper initiative. So Hilary Lee, who was poached by Mike Rivers' team from Laura Dillon's team, there was fisticuffs in the corridor. No, there wasn't really. But Hilary is now working as our Rough Sleeper officer, doing a great job. We don't have a huge Rough Sleeper problem in Waverley, but it is there. And Hilary is working as well with some of these much more difficult clients, in the sense that they have issues that are harder to resolve, harder to maintain any kind of a set lifestyle. So Hilary's doing that. And as I mentioned in my report, the emergency accommodation that we are providing through the modular units in Farncombe, Hilary will be managing those, and that's another facility that we have to place single homeless people who will probably almost certainly present with some kind of a mental health issue. The government recognises the homelessness team as being successful. We get a considerable amount of flexible homelessness grant from the government each year to maintain our homelessness service. There is a great challenge for the team, exactly the same as Laura's team, in the sense that they are dealing, it's difficult, particularly during the pandemic, when you're working at home, either in your lounge or in your bedroom, and you are dealing with people who are shouting at you, swearing at you, and you are having to disappoint 75% of people who talk to you because you just can't give them what they want. And so we also have the opportunity to access the clinical psychologist, and I know a number of my homelessness team do that. Just to finish really, and with homelessness, as I say, mental health is a major driver, and we do pull in agencies and partners to help support those with complex needs. One thing that I think the homelessness team are aware of is the fact that our counsellors appreciate what they do. And I hear that frequently, and that goes a long way, and I pass that on to them. So thank you for your support. Again, perhaps slightly more general than Laura, but as you can see, so many people who do present as homeless do have mental health issues linked with various other needs that we try with our partners, with our specialist support team, through our multi-agency meetings, to do the very best we can for our clients. And I'm too happy to take your questions.
Ms. Kessler-Baker.
Well, thank you for that. I suppose what I picked up from what you're telling me, sorry, was the fact that there are a lot of people with undiagnosed mental health problems. And I'm wondering if the team is actually doing a very good job in perhaps giving people, these poor people who do suffer from mental health problems, insight into what's happening to them. Because I can imagine that people aren't really aware. And I know when people have schizophrenia, that it can take years for them to understand what's wrong with them. And it must be very difficult to cope when you don't have an understanding. So that was really
a comment, which perhaps you could comment on. I was interested that you have access to a clinical psychologist, because that must be a very useful shortcut. The waiting lists are so long. Very often people don't get to see a clinical psychologist at all. They're given a different kind of treatment. And I was very interested in hearing about the community mental health recovery service and the fact that it's hard to get a referral. And I'd like to hear a bit more about that, because if we counsellors have any weight or status, maybe there's something that could be done about that. Maybe not through the Housing Committee, maybe through the Community Wellbeing Committee. I don't know. And looks rather as if the scrutiny committees are going to be compacted. So I don't know what opportunities there are. But anyway, that was really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Just a couple of points. First of all, the undiagnosed mental health. Yes, I think it can actually focus some of our clients, because to be accommodated by Waverley, I would say there are hoops to jump through, but you know what I mean. It's not just handed on a, people do need to engage with us, and they need to engage with us thoroughly. And if there is a need for medical intervention or perhaps psychiatric intervention, then they are very clearly encouraged to do that. The clinical psychologist is for our staff. So it's to help our staff keep sane and to keep a healthy work-life balance, and to be able to deal with the continual, sort of difficulties that they experience each day. And it would be good to try and establish how we could engage more fruitfully with the community mental health recovery service. So yes, I think that's a good point to raise. Thank you.
Councillor Keane. I beg your pardon.
So I was just going to ask, what training do we offer to our housing staff in recognising mental illness problems? I suspect you will have a sixth sense about it, but I just wonder whether we're doing enough as a council to train our staff to recognise these symptoms, because the work you do is brilliant, and you probably are the first people to actually come across the person concerned and signpost them to where they should have been signposted probably by others a long time before. But what training do we give?
I can answer that. So we do undertake regular training. Actually, in January, February this year, the team undertook suicide first aid through understanding suicide intervention. It's a recognised qualification through City and Guilds. And we will undertake regular safeguarding training, which the community safety team put on. And we will also link in with Surrey County Council with regular kind of training there. And any training which comes our way, we will absolutely put all of our staff on there. They couldn't be trained enough to be able to, we want to equip them with the tools to be able to manage the cases that they are presenting. In regards to the undiagnosed mental health issues, is that the criteria for getting mental health help is just getting higher and higher. And that's where the biggest gap I feel that we see is probably the lower end, not necessarily the higher end mental health, but it's the lower end where they don't meet the threshold to be able to reach those services. So my team ends up doing a lot of what would normally we would all see social workers undertaking, but actually we end up doing a lot of it until they potentially might get to a point where they need a higher level of support from the mental health team. But I would say that anybody, if they are suffering with mental health, everything starts with your GP.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Keane.
Just two things really. you know, when you talk about mental health, I mean, I know from personal experience somebody who had thought they had depression for many, many years, and at the age of 50 was diagnosed with bipolar, who then wanted to commit suicide. And so that had been going along in their life for a very long time, and they had no knowledge that they were bipolar. And so they managed to get treatment. So that's an issue that's, you know, obviously you see that people are just think they're depressed, but they're not. They're very, very unwell people, really. The other thing I wanted to ask you was, do you have any contact with societies such as the Autistic Society? Because I'm sure that you must have people within your housing structure or our housing structure that are on the autistic spectrum, and recognizing that is very, very difficult. And I just wondered if you have that training.
We haven't had any training, but we do link in with adult social care, which there is a separate department for the learning disability team, which autism comes under, which is extremely underfunded. And we've actually a recent case that we have an extremely complex case that we have managed along the sides of mental health and adult social care, where the person that we were assisting, she had sort of floated in and out between the system, but hadn't actually really had a formal diagnosis. But they were fairly sure, but because of her potential autistic disability, and because she was in her 50s, they couldn't get that formal diagnosis. And like I say, there is a lack of funding within that area, and I think there's nothing particularly within the borough. It's quite far away that they can actually would travel to get assistance for that. So that is something which, you know, does need looking at widely.
Okay, thank you. I'd be very interested to get another perspective on this. We've got two members of the tenants panel here, Terry and Gillian. We've heard the officer perspective. As members, we all come into contact. It's fairly regular for mental health to be a cause of housing issues, or suspected cause. But how does it come up in tenants panel discussions? What's your perspective on how the council's handling it?
Well, we have no specific training, so it's been very hard for us to recognise that. I mean, I have some past history in that, but it's probably something we should be looking at. But I've not been able to identify that anybody that raises an issue with us, there is a mental welfare problem.
Okay, thank you. No, I was kind of thinking, you know, does it come up in tenants panel discussions? Mental health's an issue. Council's not doing a good job, or the council's doing a great job. You know, it's just another way of looking at it. You know,
No negative or positive.
Okay, thank you.
Could I just say, Richard, again, we don't have any specific training in this area, unless, like Jackie, I've been in the National Health Service many, many years ago, but I've not worked specifically with mental health issues. So it's a difficult area, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, I was just probing to see whether it's an aspect that gets talked about in tenants panel discussions.
It hasn't, but I think you might have raised our awareness of it with Lorna telling us what she is today. It's making me think, you know, I need to know more about it. It's really helpful.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, so there's no recommendation here. Did members hear anything there that they think we ought to pick up and run with, or even the officers? You know, is there anything where you think the housing committee could provide extra support by looking at something in detail or requesting follow-up?
Chairman, could I just say that I think we should, you know, make a note of the fact that what a wonderful job that these teams are doing in very, very difficult circumstances. And, you know, I do understand to quite a degree how difficult the issue is. So I think, you know, it should be noted that, that we would like to really praise them for the work they're doing.
Indeed, absolutely. So if you could jot that down, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think it would be helpful in the future to have another presentation for another of our specialist providers, because I think it was 2 years ago, and I think, you know, in the future it would be good to have something like that, more for members to be informed, learn more themselves about the problems, the difficulties, the complexities that are out there. You can hear from me, I can bring the homelessness team in, but certainly people like to transform York Road project. Some of the people that work with York Road would, I think the committee would find it challenging, fascinating and horrifying. So, you know, I think if we could put that perhaps in the work programme and then keep it on the agenda, because it is a big issue for both Laura's team and my teams. If that's all right.
Okay, thank you. That's a really constructive suggestion. So Mark, you jot that down, and you've got a question as well, or a comment?
Yeah, it sounded like there might have been a specific recommendation about there being some sort of protocol for how councillors fit in cases where there are maybe ASB complaints that have kind of mental health as a root cause. I don't know if you want to actually make that as a formal recommendation to have such a protocol.
I think we were talking about how councillors can be involved, and I wear two hats on this. I mean, Laura is absolutely right about confidentiality, but as far as I'm concerned, we are all Waverley. We all have a concern. And I have to say, you know, I will pick up the phone to councillors, or councillors will pick up the phone to me. We've got a particularly difficult situation in one of our wards at the moment with a couple of councillors involved, and I keep them as up to speed as I possibly can, so that they, you know, they are aware, they can be part of the team that is trying to resolve this. So I don't think it says officers and members. We are trying to resolve this, and to be fair to councillors, it's in your ward. You are getting the flack for it. I'm thinking of this particular case. What we can't do is reveal what the police are doing, because in some of these very difficult neighbour disputes, antisocial behaviour situations, I don't know what the police are doing, but I do trust the borough commander that she knows what she's doing. And that's what I have to say. So I'm, and it's probably partly me, I like to keep members as informed as possible, really tell them just about all I know, because we have to trust each other on confidentiality. But it's nuanced. It's not, there's not a clear, I don't think there's a clear protocol, Chairman, on this. I think it's each individual cases. There'll be times, I think, where we have to keep certain confidences. But for my part, if I'm dealing with one of my councillor colleagues in the ward, I want to tell them all I know, because I want it resolved, and they certainly want it resolved, because it's keeping them up at night with all the phone calls. So I don't think it's a protocol. I think it's more organic.
Okay, thanks. You.
Colleague,
I thought he might.
Because it's about breaching the GDPR, and I think that's what we've got to be careful on. But I think with the GDPR, we can talk about antisocial behaviour with ward members, and I think going back to Mark's point, is that I think that's what we need to clarify. What's the protocol? What can we actually, what can we inform councillors? Because we are one council, but we are within the boundaries of the legislation. So I think that's what we need to do.
What would I do with that, Mr. Wagstaff, to moderate me?
One team. Thank you so much, both of you. We've been asking for something like this for the entire duration of this council, and I think it was good to get it when it arrived, and you've suggested something very positive in terms of follow-up. So Mark's got it down to put on our work programme. I suspect probably as a briefing session rather than including it actually in an ONS meeting, where we either get another provider in or maybe a different aspect of the housing team, and maybe do that meeting after next, or whenever it slots in conveniently, and keep doing it, so that we keep it on the radar screen and absorb a little and often, probably. Is everyone comfortable with that? Right. Thank you very much, officers, and we've noted down our congratulations for the excellent work that you're doing. Thank you. Very good. Right. Next item is Peter David on the asset management strategy. So just an update, verbal update, and I've also asked him to include in this just a bit of insight about funding and because it's fine looking at what we're going to do, and we wait with bated breath as to what we're going to do as a council for our asset management strategy, but it's not going to be free. And we've got potentially got an awful lot to do with the 2030 timeframe. And so thinking about money in sequence with thinking about what we're going to do is probably better than thinking about what we're going to do and then worrying about money. So I literally just don't know. We had an interesting briefing a few days ago on sources of funding for housing ONS. That was helpful, but this is the next stage. So the floor is all yours. Thank you very much.
Good evening, councillors and members of the tenants panel. It's been a while since I've felt like I've been in front of you explaining where we are. I think the last time I set out some of the objectives of the asset management strategy and the key components of it. We've since obviously now procured a consultant to work with us on it. Faithorn, Barrell and Timms, FFT, to those who might know. They started work got underway in mid-August. So we're in the early stages of the development of the asset management strategy. We are, as I think I explained last time, there are three components to it, just to kind of remind people of those three components. They were the strategy, which is the wider piece of work, but built into that piece of work were a specific energy study, looking at exactly how we're going to deliver the decarbonisation agenda and the climate declaration and CNAP, the carbon net zero plan. And a third part to it was an asset appraisal model. So just to remind everyone of the three components that figure. The asset management strategy, as I say, has just begun mid-August, still in its early stages, but actually hot off the press almost today is the first part of that. Just to explain actually what's been happening in only the last month, if you like, or 3 weeks, two activities, if you like. The first one is consultation with officers to understand how we work in Waverley, how we operate. Almost it was part of the specification to go back to the start to understand how we do things, how we deliver asset management, how we deliver our works, how we deliver investment, and how we deliver homes for our residents and how we deliver quality homes to our residents. So in this first part of this exercise, it's been a consultation with officers across various departments, mainly housing operations, but including housing development. And that consultation will obviously broaden at some point through councillor, the portfolio holder, to yourselves as we get more information coming through. The other strand to that strategy has been a kind of a fairly intensive document review. So the document review has been of all of our policies and procedures, almost everything that's on our website, from damp and condensation to tenant engagement, through to the old asset management strategy, through to a whole suite of policies around compliance and such like. And all of those have been drawn, both the original and the ones that are under review, into a document that then will feed into the asset management strategy, i.e. things, commitments, objectives and such like that we've made in all of those policies, including the larger policies in line with corporate strategy and housing strategy that's been mentioned earlier. So all of those various objectives, commitments have been drawn into a document, and that is quite a larger piece of work in terms of interpreting our policies and making sense of them. So those are the two activities that have actually so far been undertaken and are still underway, and there's still officers to speak to. But hot off the press is the first bit of this exercise, which is drawing out the themes that will underpin the asset management strategy. So today, and forgive me if I slip up on any of the word, on any of the pieces of it, but there are 4 pillars, and these 4 pillars that we've started with, and bear in mind they're in draft at this moment, that could change with consultation with the wider piece, but they are around quality lifetime homes, compliance, asset decarbonisation, which for all of us is the climate agenda, and asset and service planning and intelligence. So that's all the data gathering, all the information we need to know to make the decisions we need to make. So they're the 4 broad pillars. Under each of those pillars is a set of objectives, and under each of those are all of the kind of various processes that sit below that will be drawn into understanding how we meet those objectives, some of the larger objectives. I kind of wanted to also say that underneath of that, there are two things, one about capacity, and that's quite a large subject, but it deals with all the financial capacity. We've just talked about, Councillor Seaborn's just mentioned funding, obviously areas of our business plan, external funding, efficiency savings and supply chains and such like sit under that capacity, as well as our resources internally in terms of skills, training, staff, etc. So we have that sitting under, if you like, a suite of themes and objectives, and below that, which is yet to be distilled, are a suite of activities which will form, and I think you may have seen this the last time in the previous asset strategy, or at least falling out of it, when we discussed the interim kind of action plan. Out of this whole piece of work will fall AMS action plan full of a suite of activities that will be meaningful to delivering the objectives, but also to delivering the pillars that the themes, the overall themes that we're trying to develop. So that is where we are at this moment in time in terms of actual activities. I think the only thing to say is we're still on track. We started in mid-August. We've got a deadline, a timetable deadline of the end of November, beginning of December, in time to meet with a governance kind of journey that will take us through to January, when we hope to get approval for the asset management strategy. In that time, as I say, there are 2 other pieces of work which are kind of going along at the same time, which will be the energy study and the asset appraisal model. I just want to come on to, as part of talking about asset, the climate agenda and funding, I know that's something that's been raised. Obviously, a lot of what we're doing right now builds into that actual understanding of what we need to do, and I think it really should be said, although we are at this point still accessing funding. We have a number of funding opportunities. I myself am in touch with MHCLG quite often through their kind of questionnaires and requests for understanding of where we are with our funding. I don't mean to sound like we're not accessing it. At this point in time, we still need a considered and measured approach to how we access funding, because there are certain things to consider before we access larger kind of scheme improvements, like say ground source heat pumps and such like. where we haven't actually as yet defined what the improvement measures we need to undertake to our properties. That's going to come out of the energy study and the asset management strategy. At this point in time, we have access funding for LAD second round funding, and that covers a number of simple areas of improvements like insulation, but also a start point on pilot schemes around air source heat pumps, which is clearly going to be an area we have to be involved in. So that actually we've accessed about £350,000 of funding, and at the moment we're piloting that and on a timeline to try and spend that money with our private sector housing colleagues as well by the end of this year, this calendar year. The bigger funds that are in different waves at the moment, the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which you may see quite a lot about, are rather larger improvements for large scheme improvements, and as yet we're not in that position to actually access that funding because we don't have all the information and the data to build the bids that we need to bid for. So I think it's mentioned in the agenda about the Green Homes Grant. That is not one that we personally are accessing, but as a Waverley Borough, our residents are accessing, and that's administered through Surrey Action. So I think if we need to bring back some details of that fund and how much we've accessed and where we are on it, we can do for the next meeting. But in terms of our overall plan, it is almost to get on the ground as soon as we can, but notwithstanding the fact that if we do that, we need a measured approach, because there are certain things, wider things that we need to consider around recharging, leaseholder recharging, where we do it to wider blocks, where we do improvements to wider blocks, and life cycle costing to ensure that we are getting the best value from our investment when we take on, when we actually access the funding. So that will come. I think there'll be more details. We are speaking to our colleagues in MHCLG regularly and explaining where we're at. And I'm for sure that out of the AMS development, the asset management strategy development, will come requirement to access that funding as well at the same time, but it has to almost ally itself to our overall goal. And one of the things we have yet to do is set either a target of carbon reduction, because clearly our stock is not all going to come down to carbon zero, but a lot of it might do and go very close. Obviously our new build will. And the other thing that we definitely will be working to is either that and or a carbon target. I think I've mentioned this before. Most of our stock is sitting at around an EPC C level grading, and we're looking, possibly one of our targets may be to actually set an EPC B, which has its own carbon reduction targets with it. So we need to get to that point, and we need to get to a point where in the AMS we start fleshing out our archetype improvements across the stock, as we won't actually just be saying carte blanche. We will be doing everywhere with every single improvement the same improvement across the stock. It has to be tailored and measured. So I think I'm due to speak at the next meeting again, but in between of that, there will be almost certainly more consultation. There's certainly a lot more work. We will probably have much more substance at the next meeting with the ONS committee. But at this point, I think we're still in that early kind of part of the development of the actual themes. So I think that's probably where we are at the moment.
Many thanks. Questions? Councillor Goodrich.
Chairman, I mean, for someone who was in a profession that dealt with a lot of red tape, I'm feeling sort of slightly frustrated that we're taking quite a long time to get ourselves off the starting blocks to actually do something. And bearing in mind that this council had its climate change agenda 2 years ago, is it? And we've only got 9 years to go. You know, I'm sort of worrying that we're running out of time and we'll not get there because we'll be still consulting and educating and everything else. Do you think we'll be sort of, the pace will heat up a bit as time goes on?
Yes, in answer to that, Councillor Richard, I think certainly we feel like we're going slowly at the moment. It does feel like that. I suspect for the years prior to the years that I wasn't here, but the declaration was already in place, that there was groundwork to be done to get to this point. But I say that actually I'm quite excited that we, with this actual plan in front of us, and actually with just the themes in front of me and understanding them, we are much closer to that point when we start delivering works on the ground. And I think I do want to make it kind of, yeah, I do want everybody to understand that, and I think you probably do understand, so I don't mean in any way to patronize people, that the challenge we're dealing with. Yeah, we're dealing with a lot of stock that requires a lot of improvements. We have major capacity considerations around supply chain delivery, qualified energy, qualified energy assessors, if you like, that can assess properties and ensure that we are doing them. We are actually meeting the requirements of our objectives. And we also have to probably consider that our own staff probably need to be resourced up as well, because they've probably been delivering major works in a very traditional standard way. And what we're now talking about is a lot of change. Now, whilst a lot of the funding can be at the moment delivered through third parties, it's quite true. And we could theoretically work with the third party to deliver it. We still have to be aware of how that fits in with our overall plan. And I think it is a slow start, but some people, it's a bit like it is a little bit like a marathon. It feels like, and we are at this point just on the blocks. I would say we haven't actually started running in real terms in terms of delivering the work. But I feel that if I was to give an honest target of when we're really going to get into start getting into the chunky stuff, that's probably a year away. Yeah, an actual year away, year and a half away, because those not those pillars, but those foundations that aren't there have to be in place for us to around procurement and around understanding our stock, which we're already on the way to, before we can actually start actually doing the works on the ground and really get going in your eyes and in the committee's eyes. But I feel we are, whilst it feels like it's been a slow start, I do think we're on the right track now and we're actually moving in the right direction. So yeah, my assurance to you is that we'll keep going, and I hope to, you know, come back to you soon with a plan that actually is the one we're going to deliver and the one behind it. But I feel like there is a lot to understand, because just having seen the document suite that has been reviewed to ensure that we deliver on all our objectives, and just to understand the conversation I was having today with the consultant that's working on this with us, is that at any point through this 2030 period, up to 2030, we've still got the other housing obligations as a landlord that we need to deliver on. Safety, compliance, you've already heard today about Riverside Court and the other shelter schemes, but we've got all of our stock to cover off in terms of safety, and obviously anything that maybe heading towards disrepair in terms of stock we've got to deal with as well. The other thing to mention is that there is going to be social housing, the social housing regulation or regulator. There are definitely, almost certainly going to be further obligations on us coming from our social housing regulator. So I think we need a robust, if you like, a robust action plan that deals with all of those potential activities and all of those objectives while still delivering on our carbon commitment. And I think, yes, we have got a very short period before 2030, but I feel that once we get going and once we know our target and once we know our carbon commitment to the carbon plan, the overall council plan, then I think we'll be heading in the right direction.
Thanks, Hugh.
I understand Councillor Goodridge's frustration, but I think it's just to give it some context that we have been investing in energy efficiency in terms of insulating properties, new windows, doors. We spent millions, and we spent millions on fitting gas boilers. I think the next step where it's hard to actually move forward is the new technology. And actually, the government has decided where we're going with new technology, especially around gas. And I think that is going to be our challenge, is how we're going to heat our homes in the future. And is nitrogen going to be the replacement of gas? So can we still use these boilers? So yes, it's frustrating around delays, but I think it's a bigger context in where the country is going as a whole in these areas. But just to reassure, where we have got the technology or the knowledge of what we can do, we have been doing. So again, this year we have been insulating properties, continuing to insulate properties, continue to do cavity walls. Hopefully we would get the windows and doors contract also up and running. So these all help the accommodation. I think overall, and although we've got big steps to move forward, our homes are, in terms of energy performance, are relatively good. But of course, it's that big step up going forward, and it's that technology, and where, as I say, that we have to understand. Then we have to provide the data to actually move forward. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Elves.
Thank you, Chairman. Peter, so what you're basically saying is we'll have 7 years to adapt all our housing stock. If you're saying you're starting a year and a half, that's going to be a year and a half, isn't it? Probably. So that's going to leave us 7 years. What does that equate to in the number of houses per annum that have got to be adapted?
Yes, that is kind of what I'm actually suggesting. I'm suggesting there are definitely 2 phases to this, or even 3 phases. The first phase is a date. It sounds like, as Councillor Goodridge has just said, that we're still treading water, but actually we need to fully understand all of our data to make the improvements, data gather everything we need to make the right improvements to the right houses. The next 7 years is probably going to be made up of an early part of the low-hanging fruit, all the things we definitely haven't already done but could do. And then the third part of this, which is the latter years, is the technology that Hugh's just referred to. It's not surprising that the technology, whilst it is there and people have heard of it, the take-up of things like air source heat pumps is not big at all. And convincing persuading and having the communication with all our tenants around the removal, if you like, of gas to replace with air source heat pumps, which is one of the primary areas of improvement, is going to be the hardest battle we face. And trying to everybody to understand, if you like, that actually on-demand heat at the same level that a boiler provides is not going to be the same for an air source heat pump. It may be more efficient and it will keep people warm, but it's not going to be the same on demand that you get from a gas boiler. So the conversations that we've got to have over these early years with our residents, tenants, is around technology before we start actually putting it into their house. And I think a number of you have seen a number of the early calculations around energy, which definitely suggest that, and if Councillor Marriott was here, who attended one of the sessions I gave, it was around air source heat pumps, and it was around solar PV and microgeneration. So they're the two areas that we're going to have to step up much more than we already have. We have already done most of the obvious candidates, but everywhere we're going to have to look for new technology around microgeneration and air source heat pumps. So yes, it sounds like 7 years isn't a lot of time. It's true, and I'm myself, I'm not in any doubt that that is a tight timeline to deliver. But bear in mind, as yet we haven't set our target, so we haven't actually worked out if we're going to go at a lower rate of carbon reduction, or whether we're going to go at the highest rate possible to a lot of our traditional stock. And that has to be determined at this point in time. So I would hope that out of the energy study, we can bring that decision, that conversation to this committee for consideration. But that target has to be set by within internally by Waverley, and then we move forward because to that target go the various improvements that we're talking about. But I think, yes, it is a tight timeline, and yes, there's no getting away from the fact we have been talking about this for a little while, and it feels like we still haven't done as much as we may, as people may want. But I can assure you that a lot of other authorities, not many, have actually started accessing the funding as yet, and not many have actually embarked on those energy, those big energy improvements, because a lot are actually, and I give you an example, I think I may have mentioned this before, I came from a large G15 housing association who's still in a data gathering phase that's going to take almost 2.5 years to complete. So their stock is larger than ours, obviously, and I recognise that's a difference, but they are in a large data gathering phase to make sure the improvements that they do to their housing stock are the right ones, and the conversations they need to have with the residents, tenants, is the right one at the right pace. So I can only give a commitment that we are working on it. We will come back to you and give you a progress update of where we are the next time, and I will be as honest as I can about where we are. And hopefully, you know, I do say this, we are continually looking at funding opportunities, and as I said at the beginning, we're in dialogue with MHCLG regularly about what our potential for a bid is and where we're at with that bid. So I will keep you up to speed. Hopefully, I will be able to report on our funding that we've currently accessed for grant funding from the LAD2 scheme, which has been in partnership, as I said, with our private sector housing colleagues and our and the social rented sector that we're looking after.
Thanks. Councillor Baker.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
I just really need a very brief answer to this question, but you were talking about third-party funding so that the contractors presumably are paid directly for the work they do. Given the government's record on energy generation in small scale, that is, with photovoltaic panels, and what happened to that scheme, where people were well rewarded initially, and then the benefits tailed off for those who put the panels in. I'm just wondering if there will be competition for these grants, and that if we leave it longer, that we may not get such a good grant, or I don't think I trust the government very much to keep up
the level of the grants as time goes by. So I wouldn't want us to miss out on that. Thank you.
Yes, in answer to that question, I think you're right. It won't be, those grants won't be available forever through the whole lifetime of our climate change commitment to 2030 at the same level. I can't say that with hand on, for sure, but I think that that is definitely the case. This is the early kind of pathfinder grants that will get people going before they look at their own investment and the way they invest in their stock. I think for us, we are accessing grants at the moment, maybe not at the level that everybody would like, but we are accessing grants. And part of that is to make sure we are accessing grants, but part of that is to actually understand the projects that we're using them for. And well, I think Hugh has mentioned that we are doing some of the basic insulation measures that and have been for a while. Some of the newer grants that we're taking up are for newer technologies, which are not as well tested. And I don't mean the PV. We can put PV on. That isn't one that's actually giving us the payback we need. We in terms of CO2. And if we were to access the grant for PV without doing the joined up works of air source heat pump or any other works, then it would only mean that we probably have to go back and revisit the property. Now, we really want to make sure that actually what we're doing is going to all of our properties just the once. So I think we already have that kind of issue going on for where we've already accessed PV before and put PV on, where we now have to consider how that technology, that's older technology, fits with newer technology to ensure that we get the carbon reduction that we want on the property. So as I probably have been saying more than once now, I think we will continue to look at that funding and look where we can actually pilot it and make use of it while we're developing the plan, so that it kind of feels like that we're still delivering and still taking money where we can. And I recognize that is a concern, obviously, and I can assure you we're not just bypassing looking at funding. I've made it quite clear when in discussions with the consultants who we're working on, that we need to look at where we can have those early wins on grant funding now.
Thanks, Councillor Keane.
Yes, I just wanted to ask the question. I don't understand this very well, these air source heat pumps, but I do understand that they are fearfully expensive things to fit. So even if you were to start fitting those, I mean, the financial cost would be enormous to fit them. So that would be a very long-term project, I would guess.
Yes, it is. I think they are expensive. They are expensive at the moment, but technology is improving all the time, and they are, the grants are subsidizing at the moment, but I feel that payback that I talked about, that life cycle costing, that's how we look at improvements, if you like, especially in the energy world. That's going to be the affordability scale in terms of our 30-year, 10-year business plan, and how much, if you like, we save over that period that pays back in. So whilst the upfront cost, as it is with most things, PV and such like, are high, technology will improve, costs will come down. Those actual air source heat pumps have come down in cost since 5 years, 6 years, 10 years ago when they first started appearing on the scene. I expect them to come down in cost as we move forward. And yes, you're right. We've still got the cost involved in actually installing them. But I think the biggest task, and I don't underestimate this, is the idea that actually people, even down to a very simple level, like twiddling with the controls, know how to twiddle with the controls on their current gas boiler. And we've got to change that mindset, both that and the overall mindset of actually this is in everyone's interest to go this route. So that kind of conversation with our tenants is I think the biggest biggest challenge we face, rather than even the technology. And that's what's got to be built into our, if you like, our plan going forward. So yes, that's probably to answer your question, if you like.
Okay, I'm going to a couple of quick questions, hopefully quick. Will you be presenting alternatives in your plan, in that 2030 is an arbitrary time? Sounds like that's going to require us to fix basically 3 houses every working day from when we start right up to 2030, which, you know, intuitively sounds like an awfully stiff task. So there's 2 ways to go to this. 2030 is the target, and starting now with what actually might feel more comfortable, and whatever answer that gives. Will you be giving alternatives for council to consider, or will there just be one answer?
No, in all things in life, there are always options, and I hope to bring back that, if you like, the asset management strategy will have a variety of options in it that will lead us to choose to deliver both different levels of carbon reduction. And just to give an example, if we go for a plan which is at net zero, as close to net zero, that could take us longer than delivering improvements along the level I've spoken about earlier, about setting a target of EPC-B. So without a doubt, the plan will, the asset management strategy will come up with an option, alternative options to put in front of this committee. And I think, yes, I recognise that it's been spoken about many times, I don't think by yourself on a few occasions, about the rate of houses that we'll need to cover. Now that is true, we will do, but we won't cover them all at the same level. That's what we need to get across here. Some will require a lot more, others will not require as much, and I think that's where we just need to understand, whilst we haven't got going as yet in earnest, I think this is setting out the plan for some of that latter work that needs to be done, that's more intensive rather than the light touch that we might have to do for others. But I'm certain that the plan will come back with alternative options. Whether they're palatable or not is another thing, but at least they'll set them out for everybody to understand. And I do think that even though we might have a carbon reduction target set for 2030 by the end of the AMS or by the end of the AMS journey, we may still have to continue reducing further. So I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that when we reach 2030, that's the end of, the end of the line. I feel we'll be on an endless journey to reduce carbon forever, until actually we've reversed everything. So I think that is how I would like to sort of put it in context, if you like, but there will be options.
Good, thank you. And will you be far enough advanced that we can actually have a fairly chunky number in the 2022 to 23 budget for doing stuff, rather than actually getting the program moving?
I know this is a hot sort of potato or hot coal in everybody's consideration at the moment, but yes, we're currently at this moment in budget setting season anyway, but for sure the AMS will set out our investment plan over the next 10 years, and it will also be dovetailing into the 30-year business plan. So we will have chunky costs that reflect this type of work. It's not, it will almost certainly be available and will be in front of our finance colleagues by the end, for sure.
Thank you very much. Councillor Goodrich.
Sorry, thank you for allowing me to come back. I thought we had the strategy of this council was that we'd have a net zero carbon by 2030. If I'm wrong there, please correct me. And if so, the alternatives is a question of how we get to that, not whether we change the goalposts.
Yes, can I answer that? I think we do have a net zero target, but what hasn't been fleshed out is net zero across the whole, not just the housing stock, across the whole council. So there are different ways you can get to net zero. Just on a simplistic level, you can plant millions and millions of trees to offset the carbon production. I'm not suggesting that's what we're doing, but our homes are not going to, all of our homes are not going to reach be carbon zero, net zero by 2030, because intrinsically they can't, that can't happen. Yeah, that can't actually happen because their fabric isn't able to be changed or altered in such a way that that would allow that to happen. So what I'm suggesting is that the target will be built upon what is reasonably both affordable but also reasonably able to do to those properties across our stock. And I think just to say the CNAP, which this does dovetail into the carbon net at the action plan that's released by our corporate colleagues at the highest level, this dovetails into that. So our contribution will be part of that, and the overall contribution, whether it's our leisure services or our the way our supply chain operates, all of those things will be have a carbon, if you like, reduction label to them or tag to them.
Excellent. That was fascinating. Thank you very, very much. And we look forward to seeing you again in November. Yeah, this is
Thank you.
Absolutely fascinating. Many thanks. Good. Right. Next is the results of the 2021 STAR survey, and Annalisa Housen's going to take us through those. Thanks.
Thank you. So back to the paperwork. This report just gives you a brief overview of the findings of the survey and identifies how we're planning to use those findings and what communication plan and work we've got in the pipeline. So just as a brief reminder, STAR is the survey of tenants and residents, and it's a perception survey taken every 2 to 3 years. So it's how people are feeling about the service, not necessarily what they've experienced. We did anticipate that satisfaction would be reduced due to the changes and challenges, as you're all aware of, with the responsive repairs and void contractor, and also the fact that we went into a pandemic and lockdown, and lots of things didn't happen and did happen last year. So the survey was deferred for a year, but we thought it was important that we did run it this year to provide us with evidence to help inform the asset management strategy, to help us with our action plan to meet the Charter for Social Housing Residents requirements, and to give us a fresh baseline of where we're at, so we can use this as a basis to springboard and improve from. So you've got a brief summary of the results. As you can see, there is overall a reduction in the percentage of tenants who are satisfied overall with the service. But what's interesting is that the results have given us quite detailed information, and we've got more people who are more satisfied and more people who are more dissatisfied. So we've got a bit of a polarization. It seems like where we get things right, we get them really right, and where we get it wrong, we get it really wrong, and we need to kind of move everything up the satisfaction rating. But just to kind of put it in the national context, as I mentioned, the pandemic and the lockdown, the overall satisfaction is mirrored by other social housing providers. Generally, there was an upturn in satisfaction with social landlord providers as we went into the pandemic, as we were doing all our calls and providing emergency services for people. And then as time went on and we eased a little bit out of lockdown and started to introduce services across the board for social housing providers, there's been a dip in overall satisfaction. As you're all very aware, having looked at the performance information and seen complaints before, the overall driver for satisfaction is how we're doing with repairs and maintenance. So it's really important that we get that right, which was why it was nice to see in Hugh's overview that we have seen a turnaround with our new interim contractor, and we are seeing a change in the performance indicators. Personally, I was really pleased to see that there had been an increase in the number of tenants who felt that they'd been listened to and their voices had been, they'd been heard, and we'd acted upon their beliefs and what they told us. So that was really good. And over the next few months, we will be delving deeper into this report, having further discussions with tenants and members of staff. We've started a series of September socials where we've been sharing the details with our tenants. We've shared them with the tenants panel, and Gillian's agreed to work closely with my colleague Brenda Glover to do a bit more in-depth analysis and look at what we want to, what areas we want to improve. And as I said, the results are reflective of our current performance. I don't think they told us anything we weren't aware of, but it gives us that benchmark and that evidence for us to now work on the asset management strategy, work on our service plans for next year and our improvement plans. And it gives us, as I said, that benchmark and that kind of new baseline for which we can judge ourselves. We are intending, I will be inviting you all to a further meeting about STAR, where we've got Adam Payne, the market researcher who did the survey for us, will be presenting on the results and give you a little bit more context and a bit more detail as well. Those invitations will come out for the 1st of October at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It'd be nice to see you there if you can, virtually or in person. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you very much. And I saw something interesting, really very much towards the end of this report, on page 65, actually, where you wouldn't normally expect to find anything that was going to spark your thoughts. But I saw under 6.4, equality, diversity and inclusion, that the results indicated that under 35s, over 65s and BAME have a more positive view of our services. And I thought, how interesting. And first of all, I thought I'd ask you if you have any ideas as to why those particular categories of people should be more positive about the services. And actually, if thoughts don't occur to us about why that should we be delving a bit further? Because I'd really like to know whether it's their specific circumstances or their attitudes of mind. So over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, that's a really good thought. And that's, this is kind of the opener of a conversation, and we do want to delve further into those questions. Our understanding is that under 35-year-olds may well have been in private rented accommodation before they came to council accommodation, and are therefore more satisfied with the value for money for their rent, the fact that they've got a secure home, they're not going to have a turnover of 6-month assured short-hold tenancies. That would be our premise, but we do want to talk to them further about why it is that they're more satisfied. Because generally you'll find that younger people are less satisfied than older people. So we've got this middle ground of people my age who are more dissatisfied. And I think that's across the board. It's not just with the housing service, it's probably with everything. But the steps we can take to try and change that around. And it was really interesting and really nice to see that tenants from BAME groups also were more satisfied than the general populace. And again, I think that's because of the security of accommodation, the stable home, the services we're giving, all the good things we've heard about Laura's team delivering to people to help communities. And so I think you're right, that there's opportunity to delve, but it's a really positive finding, even though overall we've had that slight dip in satisfaction.
Okay, I've got a couple of points. Firstly, I'm in against a very challenging background. I take this to be really good results, so well done. The dip matches with the national dip, so we're not out of line. Well done. Responsive repairs, we're obviously coming towards the end of the life of one contract, and then that's going to follow with bedding in a new contractor. So could I suggest, and see whether colleagues support the idea, but can we suggest that at least the next two subsequent meetings, we just get an update on what's being done to ensure that the departing contractor doesn't lose all enthusiasm for the job on the way out, and that the new contractor is brought up to speed as possible. So is there support for us doing that? Put that on the work programme? Yep. Okay, so that's one suggestion. And the second point is one that Peter had already honed in on. That's the worrying factor that only around half of our tenants are particularly enthusiastic about new technology for energy efficiency and carbon reduction. So I guess we probably ought to just note down a recommendation to the portfolio holder that is, the committee notes that's a point of concern, and something needs to be done to get that number to a much higher point. Does that make sense?
I think the issue is you'd probably find, if you asked all your council members and everybody in your ward, you'll have some people who are really excited about green initiatives and carbon agenda, and people who are sat on the M25 during the week. And then you'll have other people who are just like, yeah, that's okay, just see what happens. I think the information this gives us is it gives us the awareness that we know that only about half of our tenants are actively interested in energy efficiencies. So it means that we can tailor our correspondence and the way we work with people much more intensively, and think about different ways to get that message across. You know, we haven't got lots of people waiting to go, oh yes, please give me a heat pump, a ground force heat pump, air source heat pump. And so we need to make sure we've got those communications, and we're spreading the good word. And with the help with the tenants panel, you know, once we've got a few in and we can demonstrate how well they're working and how it's changed people's lives and reduced their energy costs, then we've got a good story to tell, and we can use that to promote and change people's behaviours.
Yeah, absolutely. So just wanted to flag that you know that leapt out as something that, you know, Peter was saying, that's got to be addressed. And you're absolutely right. It applies everywhere, but we're just housing overview and scrutiny, so we'll worry about our tenants. Right. So, oh yeah, Terry, please.
Yes, I think really with all the obstacles that have been placed in the last 18 months, 2 years, I quite expected this to be a lot worse than it is, and it's to the housing teams that we have to say thank you. It appears that a good job is being done. And as for the 65s, I think when you get to 65, you'll accept what you've got, really, because you're not too sure how long it's going to be there anyway. So thank you.
Thanks for that. Right. Okay, so our papers have recommendations that the committee reviews the report and identifies any areas for further scrutiny. I'm not sure well, yes, we have. We've identified that we want reports back on progress on seeing one contractor out and bringing in the new one. So that's that. And then the second recommendation is that we request an update report sharing the improvement action plan following the consultation and further reviews of results at the next committee meeting, and or agrees any observations. That's what the recommendation says. So I think we're following up with briefing on the first. We're not, with more detail. And I guess we can probably take it from there as to whether we put anything in the November meeting to follow up. Is everyone comfortable with that? Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Good, thanks very much, Annalise. And again, well done. Right, we previously agreed to establish a task and finish group to go through the allocations policy. I'm delighted to say that we've got a full suite of volunteers to undertake this important piece of work during third quarter, i.e. the remainder of the year. So Mark's pulled together a scoping document with some incisive input from Michael Rivers, and I'm going to hand over to Mark to take us through the item.
Yeah, I should probably say there was probably actually the lion's share of the input came from Mike and other people in the housing team rather than from me. But essentially this, if you pass this, this is confirming the membership this and the kind of broad scope and some of the kind of evidence we might look at. But it should be said, if anyone has suggestions for people that might be worth speaking to, documents it might be worth reading, this isn't the last shot. Please do feed those in if you think of them at a later date. I would suggest, given it's almost 9 o'clock, we don't start getting into the logistics of how it's going to run, and we can maybe have those discussions with the amongst the members of the group themselves, and to agree things like when meetings will be, form they will take.
Okay, so everyone's happy with that, are they? Right, so the one thing that isn't sorted out yet is a chair for the committee. So if there are any volunteers, put your hand up now. Otherwise, please be thinking about it for the first meeting. We did an excellent job of acquiring a chairman at the meeting for the last committee we did, and he did an excellent job. So there's a challenge for you to think about. So we've agreed on that, and I think we can put that one to bed. Thanks for doing that, Mark. Right, and the next one's also yours. This is the scrutiny report. It's a factual summary of scrutiny activities for the last 2 council years. So you just want to introduce this?
Yeah, beyond confessing that I misspelt the name of my predecessor in this, I don't have a huge amount to add beyond what's on the page, but if you have any kind of suggestions or recommendations, or if you think there's something we've got wrong or we've missed, or it'd be good to mention, we can take those back to take those suggestions back to coordinating board and see if they want to make any changes to this document.
Any comments? Happy to accept. It's a factual report. So we don't. Oh, we have one recommendation. That's what we endorse the report. Make any suggestions for amendments? No one's suggesting any amendments, so I guess we're all happy to endorse it. Thank you very much. Well done. And floor stays yours. The last item is the committee work programme. So very quickly, take us through that.
I suppose to start off with, the good news is that the housing design standards task and finish groups recommendations went to the most recent exec where they were accepted. One of the recommendations about on-site energy generation was reworded. I think that was more, it sounds quite different, but I think it's substantively similar. It was basically just trying to make sure that it was clear that this was quite an ambitious target it was setting and how it interacted with the other bits. But otherwise, yeah, the executive seemed very keen on what the task and finish group had suggested and very keen to endorse it. So that's quite encouraging. I guess the sort of elephant in the room with this work programme is, as Councillor Baker alluded to, the Standards Committee on Monday will debate whether we move changed remits for 2 committees rather than 4. If that happens, I'll use that as an opportunity to basically redo the work programme in its entirety. So if you have any suggestions, not just about the contents, but about things like the format, the layout, the structure, like basically how almost like the template of the document can be made more helpful for you, that be feedback I'd really appreciate.
Are there any immediate comments about that? I mean, I'm sure Mark will welcome report comments by email when you know, if you wish to digest it and send things in. Yes, it'd be interesting to see where things that we have in our work programme end up, but we certainly shouldn't duck away from the things that we've already put down, making sure that they do get scrutinised in the future, in whether it be by this committee or whether it be by a successor committee. Okay, so we have a task and finish group just about to start. There's one more piece of task and finish work to follow that as well, potentially, isn't there? So that's I think all we need to worry about on that front. And I think we have enough material down there to have a meeting in November, if we still exist as a committee by then. Rather hope we do. It might be a bit rushed, but we shall see. Right, is everyone comfortable with the work programme? In which case, we don't have any reason to exclude the press and the public, so we're pretty much at an end. Can I thank all the officers for their contributions this evening? It's been really, really good. I've enjoyed the meeting. I'm not sure whether we're supposed to enjoy these meetings, but you know, it's good material, well presented by knowledgeable experts. So thank you very much. Thank you, members, for your time.